Hollywood's golden age gave us legendary performers, but some of your favorite stars had a shocking secret talent. They weren't just reading scripts, they were writing them. One Academy Award winner penned best-selling novels under a fake name. Another created entire TV series while starring in blockbusters. These are the classic actors who proved the pen was mightier than the spotlight. Ronald Reagan. Before Ronald Reagan ever stepped foot in the White House, he was crafting words that would shape America. Most people know him as the Gipper, or the guy who told Gorbachev to tear down that wall, but Reagan was secretly one of Hollywood's most prolific ghostwriters during his acting career. Reagan didn't just deliver lines, he rewrote them. Studio executives at Warner Brothers discovered early on that Reagan had this uncanny ability to punch up dialogue, making stiff corporate scripts sound natural and believable. What they didn't know was that Reagan was moonlighting as a speechwriter for corporate executives and political figures throughout the 1940s and 1950s. The wild part? Reagan wrote most of his own political speeches decades before he ever ran for office. Archives reveal that Reagan kept detailed journals filled with political observations, policy ideas, and rhetorical strategies. He was essentially writing his presidential campaign while still making B-movies like Bedtime for Bonzo. Reagan's writing style was conversational but authoritative, a skill he honed by studying radio announcers and newspaper columnists. He believed that effective communication required emotional connection, not just facts. This philosophy later became the foundation of what political scientists call the Reagan Doctrine. Critics dismissed Reagan as just another pretty face from Hollywood, but his private manuscripts tell a different story. He wrote extensively about economics, foreign policy, and conservative philosophy. His essay collection, discovered after his death, revealed sophisticated political thinking that predated his gubernatorial campaign by 20 years. The financial impact was substantial. Reagan's ghostwriting work reportedly earned him more money than his acting roles in the late 1950s. He charged premium rates because his speeches consistently delivered results for clients. Corporate executives credited Reagan's words with closing major deals and swaying public opinion. Even his acting colleagues were shocked when they learned about his writing career. James Cagney once said Reagan had the sharpest political mind in Hollywood, which seemed impossible given his goofy movie roles. But Reagan understood something most actors didn't. Words create reality, and he was determined to shape that reality long before he ever ran for public office. Steve McQueen. Steve McQueen was the king of cool, but behind that leather jacket and motorcycle was a guy obsessed with Eastern philosophy and existential literature. While other actors partied in Beverly Hills, McQueen spent his nights writing dense philosophical essays about mortality, freedom, and the meaning of authentic living. McQueen's writing journey started during his military service, where he discovered the works of Jean-Paul Sartre and Albert Camus. He began keeping philosophical journals, questioning everything from Hollywood's superficiality to America's materialistic culture. These weren't casual diary entries. McQueen was crafting sophisticated arguments about existentialism and individualism. The breakthrough came when McQueen started writing essays for underground literary magazines under the pseudonym Samuel Reeves. His piece titled The Velocity of Solitude became a cult classic among college students and intellectuals. Nobody knew the guy writing about alienation and authentic existence was the same actor racing cars in Bullitt. McQueen's writing style was spare and direct, influenced by Hemingway, but with a philosophical edge that Hemingway never attempted. He wrote about speed as metaphor, violence as communication, and silence as the ultimate form of rebellion. His essays predicted many of the cultural shifts that would define the 1960s counterculture movement. The financial side was less important to McQueen than the intellectual freedom. He donated most of his writing earnings to literacy programs and philosophy departments at small colleges. McQueen believed that Hollywood was poisoning American culture, and his essays were his way of fighting back against what he called the entertainment industrial complex. Fellow actors like Paul Newman and James Garner knew about McQueen's writing, but kept it secret at his request. McQueen worried that being seen as an intellectual would damage his tough guy image. He was probably right. Audiences wanted the king of cool, not the king of contemplation. The irony is that McQueen's philosophical insights made him a better actor. His understanding of existential themes informed his performances in films like The Great Escape and Papillon. He wasn't just playing characters, he was exploring fundamental questions about freedom, identity, and human dignity through his roles. Grace Kelly. Grace Kelly traded Hollywood for royalty, but what nobody knew was that Princess Grace of Monaco spent her final decades writing and illustrating children's books that became international bestsellers. She published over a dozen titles under the pen name G.P. Rainier, and her stories shaped childhood development theory for an entire generation. Kelly's transition from actress to author began shortly after her marriage to Prince Rainier. Feeling isolated in Monaco's royal court, she started writing stories to entertain her own children. What began as bedtime tales evolved into sophisticated narratives that dealt with complex themes like identity, belonging, and cultural differences. Her first published work, The Little Princess Who Lost Her Voice, became an instant sensation across Europe. The story followed a young girl who loses her ability to speak and must learn to communicate through art and kindness. Critics praised Kelly's ability to tackle serious subjects without talking down to young readers. The writing process was meticulous. Kelly researched child psychology, consulted with educators, and tested her stories on children from different social backgrounds. She wanted her books to be more than entertainment. They needed to help kids navigate real emotional challenges. Each story included subtle lessons about empathy, courage, and self-acceptance. Financially, the books were incredibly successful. Translation rights sold in over 30 countries, and Kelly donated millions of dollars in royalties to children's literacy programs worldwide. She established the Princess Grace Foundation for Young Writers, which still operates today and has helped launch thousands of literary careers. The secrecy was intentional. Kelly worried that her celebrity status would overshadow the quality of her writing. She wanted the books to succeed based on their merit, not her fame. Publishers agreed to maintain the pseudonym even after her identity was discovered by literary journalists. Fellow writers praised Kelly's work. Renowned children's author Maurice Sendak called her stories emotionally honest and psychologically sophisticated. Kelly had somehow managed to capture the complexity of childhood experience while maintaining the magical quality that makes great children's literature timeless. The tragic irony is that Kelly died just as she was planning to reveal her authorship and launch a new series about multicultural friendship. Her unpublished manuscripts, discovered after her death, revealed plans for educational television programs and international cultural exchange initiatives. Jimmy Stewart. Jimmy Stewart's aw shucks persona hid one of Hollywood's most powerful and haunting literary voices. The star of It's a Wonderful Life spent decades writing poetry about his experiences as a World War II bomber pilot, creating some of the most moving anti-war literature of the 20th century. Stewart's writing began during the war itself, when he commanded bombing missions over Germany. Unlike other celebrity soldiers, Stewart saw genuine combat and lost close friends in aerial battles. His poems captured the psychological trauma of warfare with an honesty that mainstream war literature couldn't match. The breakthrough piece was A Letter to Mom from 30,000 Feet, a devastating poem about watching fellow airmen die during a bombing raid. Stewart wrote it the night after losing his best friend and co-pilot over Berlin. The poem circulated among veterans, but wasn't published until decades later, when Stewart finally agreed to release his war writings. Stewart's poetry style was deceptively simple, using everyday language to describe extraordinary horror. He wrote about the smell of burning aircraft, the weight of dropping bombs on civilian targets, and the impossible burden of surviving when good men died. His work influenced an entire generation of veteran poets and anti-war activists. The financial aspect was never important to Stewart. He donated all poetry royalties to veterans organizations and mental health research. Stewart believed that society romanticized warfare, and his poems were intended to show the real psychological cost of military service. He wanted people to understand that war heroes weren't heroes. They were traumatized survivors. Literary critics initially dismissed Stewart's work as celebrity vanity publishing, but serious poets like Robert Lowell and James Dickey recognized his talent. Dickey called Stewart's war poetry the most authentic voice of aerial combat ever put to paper. Stewart had managed to capture experiences that prose couldn't adequately express. The secrecy lasted for 40 years. Stewart worried that his Hollywood career would suffer if audiences knew he wrote dark, complex poetry about killing and death. He also felt guilty about surviving the war when better men died, and writing helped him process that survivor's guilt. The revelation came when Stewart donated his manuscripts to the Library of Congress for their Veterans Oral History Project. Scholars immediately recognized the literary value, and Stewart's poems are now studied in college courses about war literature and post-traumatic stress disorder. Rock Hudson. Rock Hudson was America's romantic ideal, but behind the movie star facade was a brilliant television writer who created some of the most innovative shows of the 1960s and 1970s. Hudson wrote entire series under various pseudonyms, revolutionizing television drama while maintaining his image as just another pretty face. Hudson's writing career began accidentally when he started rewriting his own dialogue to make romantic scenes more believable. Directors noticed that Hudson's improvised lines were consistently better than the scripted versions. Soon, Hudson was unofficially rewriting entire scenes and eventually entire television episodes. The breakthrough came with the creation of Westward Bound, a psychological western that ran for 5 seasons and redefined the genre. Hudson wrote the pilot script under the name Roy Fitzgerald, his real name before Hollywood transformation. The show tackled complex themes like mental illness, racial prejudice, and moral ambiguity that traditional westerns avoided. Hudson's writing style combined classic Hollywood glamour with gritty social realism. His characters were flawed but sympathetic, dealing with problems that audiences recognized from their own lives. Hudson understood that television needed to be more intimate than movies, focusing on character development rather than spectacular action sequences. The financial success was enormous. Hudson's series generated millions in syndication revenue, and his writing fees exceeded his acting salaries by the mid-1970s. He reinvested the money into independent production companies that gave opportunities to minority writers and directors who couldn't break into mainstream Hollywood. Industry insiders knew about Hudson's writing talent, but kept it quiet to protect his movie star image. Studio executives worried that audiences wouldn't believe Hudson as a romantic lead if they knew he was an intellectual who spent his free time crafting complex dramatic narratives. The creative process was collaborative. Hudson worked closely with blacklisted writers who couldn't get credit during the McCarthy era, essentially serving as their frontman. He used his celebrity status to get progressive stories onto television, smuggling social commentary into mainstream entertainment. Hudson's television work influenced the development of long-form serialized drama that became the foundation of modern television. His shows pioneered the use of recurring character arcs, moral ambiguity, and psychological realism that define prestige television today. Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe was far more than a beautiful face and breathy voice. Behind the platinum blonde persona was a fierce intellectual who wrote groundbreaking feminist essays that predicted the women's liberation movement by a full decade. Her unpublished manuscripts reveal a sophisticated political thinker who understood gender dynamics better than most academic scholars. Monroe's writing began during her marriage to Arthur Miller, when she started reading feminist philosophy and political theory. She kept detailed journals analyzing Hollywood's treatment of women, the psychology of male desire, and the economic exploitation of female sexuality. These weren't casual observations. Monroe was developing complex theories about patriarchal power structures. The breakthrough work was The Construction of Desire, a lengthy essay about how Hollywood created unrealistic female archetypes that damaged both men and women. Monroe argued that the film industry was essentially a propaganda machine that reinforced harmful gender stereotypes for profit. Her analysis was decades ahead of academic gender studies. Monroe's writing style was passionate but analytical, combining personal experience with broader social critique. She wrote about the psychological cost of performing femininity, the isolation of objectification, and the revolutionary potential of authentic female sexuality. Her essays read like a blueprint for second-wave feminism. The financial aspect was complicated because Monroe couldn't publish under her own name without destroying her career. She secretly funded feminist publications and women's rights organizations, using her Hollywood earnings to support causes that challenged the very system that made her famous. Literary scholars who later discovered Monroe's manuscripts were shocked by their sophistication. Her essay collection demonstrated deep knowledge of philosophy, psychology, and political theory. Monroe had essentially educated herself into becoming one of the most insightful feminist theorists of her generation. The secrecy was necessary for survival. Monroe understood that Hollywood needed her to be sexually available and intellectually unthreatening. Revealing her feminist consciousness would have ended her career and eliminated her platform for influencing popular culture. Monroe's influence extended beyond her writings. She mentored young actresses, encouraging them to educate themselves and question industry exploitation. Many of the women who became leaders in the feminist movement cited Monroe as an early inspiration, even though they couldn't reveal her role until years later. John Wayne. John Wayne embodied American masculinity on screen, but off camera, he was writing sophisticated political thrillers that explored the dark side of American power. Wayne published over a dozen novels under the pseudonym Marion Morrison, his birth name, creating complex narratives about corruption, betrayal, and moral compromise in Washington, D.C. Wayne's writing career started during World War II, when he felt guilty about not serving in combat, while other actors joined the military. He channeled that guilt into researching American foreign policy and intelligence operations. His novels drew from classified information provided by military contacts who admired his patriotic movie roles. The breakthrough novel was The Washington Game, a thriller about CIA operatives who discover their own government is planning a false flag operation. Wayne's inside knowledge of military culture and political connections gave the story an authenticity that other thriller writers couldn't match. The book became a bestseller, but few readers knew Wayne was the author. Wayne's writing style was lean and masculine, influenced by Hemingway, but with a political edge that explored themes of loyalty, honor, and institutional corruption. His protagonists were typically military veterans who discovered that the government they served was morally compromised. The stories reflected Wayne's own disillusionment with American political leadership. The financial success allowed Wayne to maintain independence from Hollywood studios. His thriller sales generated enough income that he could choose movie roles based on personal conviction rather than financial necessity. Wayne used his writing earnings to support conservative political candidates and military veteran organizations. Critics initially dismissed Wayne's novels as pulp fiction, but literary scholars later recognized their political sophistication. Wayne understood power dynamics and institutional corruption better than most political scientists. His thrillers predicted many of the scandals that would emerge during the Watergate era. The secrecy was strategic. Wayne worried that his writing career would undermine his movie star image and hurt his political influence. He wanted to be seen as a man of action, not a man of letters. Publishing under his birth name allowed him to maintain both identities without conflict. Wayne's political thrillers influenced an entire generation of conservative writers and filmmakers. His novels provided a template for stories that questioned government authority while maintaining respect for military service and traditional American values. Elizabeth Taylor. Elizabeth Taylor wasn't just one of Hollywood's most beautiful actresses, she was also one of its most courageous writers about mental health and addiction recovery. Taylor spent decades documenting her struggles with depression, substance abuse, and trauma through brutally honest memoirs that helped destigmatize mental illness for millions of readers. Taylor's writing began during her first stay in rehabilitation when doctors encouraged her to keep a recovery journal. What started as therapeutic exercise evolved into sophisticated memoir writing that captured the psychology of addiction with unprecedented honesty. Her descriptions of withdrawal, relapse, and recovery became essential reading for addiction counselors. The breakthrough book was Mirrors and Masks, Taylor's account of living with bipolar disorder while maintaining a successful acting career. She wrote about the exhaustion of performing happiness while struggling with suicidal depression, the way Hollywood enabled her addictions, and the challenge of finding authentic identity beneath public persona. Taylor's writing style was confessional, but not self-pitying, combining clinical understanding of mental illness with emotional insight about human suffering. She wrote about addiction as a symptom of deeper trauma, exploring themes of abandonment, perfectionism, and the impossible pressure of childhood fame. The financial impact was substantial, but Taylor donated most of her book royalties to mental health research and addiction treatment programs. She established treatment centers for low-income patients and funded research into the connection between trauma and substance abuse. Her advocacy work saved thousands of lives. Medical professionals praised Taylor's contributions to mental health awareness. Her honest descriptions of psychiatric treatment helped reduce stigma and encouraged people to seek help. Taylor had used her celebrity platform to normalize conversations about mental illness that society typically avoided. The writing process was therapeutic but difficult. Taylor had to relive traumatic experiences and confront painful truths about her relationships and career choices. She worked with ghostwriters initially, but eventually developed the confidence to write independently. Taylor's influence extended beyond her own books. She encouraged other celebrities to speak openly about mental health struggles, creating a cultural shift that made it acceptable for public figures to discuss psychological challenges without career damage. Gary Cooper. Gary Cooper's strong, silent screen persona masked a deeply philosophical mind that produced some of the most thoughtful writing about American individualism and moral courage. Cooper spent 30 years crafting essays about ethics, personal responsibility, and the price of integrity that influenced political leaders and social movements. Cooper's philosophical interests developed during his early Hollywood years when he felt uncomfortable with the superficiality of celebrity culture. He began reading classical philosophy and political theory, eventually developing his own theories about authentic living and moral behavior. His essays combined practical wisdom with intellectual rigor. The major work was Principles of Authentic Action, a collection of essays about making ethical choices in morally complex situations. Cooper wrote about the difference between popularity and respect, the importance of keeping promises even when costly, and the way that small compromises lead to major moral failures. Cooper's writing style was clear and direct, avoiding academic jargon while dealing with sophisticated concepts. He wrote about philosophy as practical guidance for everyday decision-making, not abstract intellectual exercise. His essays read like advice from a wise friend, rather than lectures from a distant scholar. The financial aspect was secondary to Cooper's desire to influence American culture. He published his essays in small literary magazines and donated speaking fees to educational institutions. Cooper believed that America was losing its moral compass, and his writing was intended to help people rediscover ethical principles. Intellectual leaders took Cooper's work seriously, despite his Hollywood background. Political philosophers like Russell Kirk and moral theologians like Reinhold Niebuhr praised Cooper's insights about individual responsibility and moral courage. Cooper had somehow bridged the gap between popular culture and serious intellectual discourse. The secrecy was partly modesty and partly strategic. Cooper didn't want his philosophical writing to seem like celebrity vanity publishing. He preferred that his ideas be judged on their merit rather than his fame. Most essays were published under initials rather than his full name. Cooper's influence on American conservative thought was substantial, but largely unrecognized. His essays about individual responsibility and moral courage influenced political leaders from both parties and helped shape the intellectual foundation of the American conservative movement. Judy Garland. Judy Garland's troubled life and tragic death overshadowed her remarkable contribution to musical theater as a composer and lyricist. While audiences knew her as a performer, Garland spent her final years writing songs and developing musical concepts that revolutionized the integration of music and narrative in theatrical productions. Garland's compositional career began during her later MGM years, when she started rewriting songs to better fit her emotional range and interpretive style. Her musical arrangements were so innovative that other performers began requesting Garland's versions rather than the original compositions. Soon, she was writing entirely original material. The breakthrough came with the creation of Rainbow's End, a semi-autobiographical musical about a performer struggling with fame and addiction. Garland wrote both music and lyrics, creating songs that advanced plot and revealed character psychology in ways that traditional musical theater rarely attempted. The show ran off-Broadway for 2 years. Garland's compositional style combined jazz harmony with classical structure, creating music that was emotionally complex but still accessible to popular audiences. Her lyrics dealt with themes of loss, hope, and resilience that reflected her personal struggles but resonated with universal human experiences. The financial success was modest but meaningful to Garland, who had lost most of her MGM earnings to mismanagement and exploitation. Her theater royalties provided financial independence and artistic control that she never had as a movie star. The creative freedom rejuvenated her spirit during her final years. Music critics praised Garland's compositional sophistication. Her harmonic progressions and melodic development demonstrated formal training that few people knew she possessed. Garland had essentially taught herself advanced music theory while maintaining a demanding performance schedule. The creative process was collaborative. Garland worked with unknown composers and lyricists, using her industry connections to give opportunities to talented people who couldn't break into commercial music. Her mentorship launched several successful careers in musical theater. Garland's influence on contemporary musical theater was profound but under-recognized. Her integration of psychological realism with musical expression became the standard for serious musical drama and influenced composers like Stephen Sondheim and Andrew Lloyd Webber. These secret writers proved that Hollywood's golden age was more intellectually rich than anyone imagined. But here's the controversial question. Did these actors hide their writing because society wasn't ready for intelligent celebrities, or because intelligence doesn't sell movie tickets? Drop your thoughts below and tell us which secret writer shocked you most. Are today's actors just as smart but still hiding it, or has Hollywood actually gotten dumber?